this is from Reason magazine. We can file this under, what do you think was going to happen? Total compliance? I don't think so. So, this is from New Zealand. It says gun control. Noncompliance Kneecaps, New Zealand's gun control scheme. As of last week, only around 700 weapons had been turned over. What possibly could be the reason behind this? Who knows? But it is what I sort of expected. Once again, responding to a horrendous crime by inflicting knee-jerk authoritarian restrictions, couldn't have said it better myself, on innocent people proves to be an ineffective means of convincing people to obey. Specifically, New Zealand's government, which also stepped up censorship and domestic surveillance. Exactly. I don't know if anybody from New Zealand is going to get this, but bloody attacks on 2 Christchurch mosques earlier this year is running into stiff resistance to new gun rules from firearm owners who are slow to surrender now have prohibited weapons and will probably never turn them in. Officials should have seen this coming. Quote, police are anticipating a number of people with banned firearms in their possession won't surrender them, Stuff reported at the end of May, based on internal government documents. As of last week, only 700 weapons had been turned over. There are an estimated 1.5 million guns, with an unknown number of subject to new prohibition on semi-automatic firearms in the country overall. Traditionally relaxed in its approach to firearms regulation, the new and enjoying a low crime rate, New Zealand has no firearms registration rule. That means authorities have no easy way of knowing what guns are in circulation or who owns them. Quote, these weapons are unlikely to be confiscated by police because they don't know of their existence. Philippa Yazbek, Gun Control New Zealand, admitted. Quote, these will become black market weapons if their owners choose not to comply with the law and become criminals instead. Screw you, Philippa. Yazbek's organization advocates registering all guns in private hands, but that won't help gathering guns already in possession of owners appalled by the new government's attack on the rights of innocent people. Government attacks, it's worth noting, that come in response to the crimes of one man who explicitly anticipated just such response. Quote, I chose firearms for the effect it would have on social discourse, the killer wrote in a document he released to explain his crimes that New Zealanders can't get, probably. The gun owners of New Zealand are a beaten, miserable bunch of baby boomers who have long since given up the fight. When was the last time they won increased rights? Their loss was inevitable. I just accelerated things a bit. Not wanting to agree with what this killer said, but let's expand on that a bit. Once a government takes rights away, or they curtail rights, or subject them to some sort of new standard, they never go back. Anytime you lose a right, anytime you say you have an access to a semi-automatic weapon and they take it away, you'll never get it back. Ever. I think that's the whole point. Politicians fulfill the murderers' predictions with panic-driven legislation. That gun owners would in large numbers defy restrictions should have been anticipated by anybody who knows the history of government attempts to disarm their subjects. Yep. Or who just glance across the Tasman Sea to Australia. Quote, in Australia it is estimated that only 20% of all banned self-loading rifles have been given up to authorities, wrote Franz Cesar, professor of criminology at the University of Vienna, after Australia's 1996 confiscation of firearms following a mass murder at Port Arthur, Tasmania. Cesar put the number of illegally retained arms in Australia at between 2 and 5 million. I hate to tell you how many weapons in the United States are in private hands. 300 million, maybe. Quote, many members of the community still possess gray market firearms because they did not surrender these during the 1996-97 gun buyback. Forced gun buyback, by the way. Don't let the word salad confuse you. Jeez. the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission conceded in its 2016 report. The Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission continues to conservatively estimate that there are more than 260,000 firearms in the illicit firearms market. Okay. Just as Australian police named, quote, outlaw motorcycle gangs, Middle Eastern organized crime groups, and other groups engaged in trafficking illicit commodities such as drugs as beneficiaries of prohibition-fueled black market in firearms, underground organizations are similarly poised to prosper in New Zealand. Exactly. Gangs in the island nation announced very loudly after the new legislation was introduced that they would not be surrendering their own weapons. Duh. Quote, will gangs get rid of their weapons? No, one prominent gang leader told Stuff. Because of who we are, we cannot guarantee our own safety. So Kiwis who actually do comply with the confiscation scheme will put themselves at a disadvantage relative to violent gangs that don't intend to obey. I don't know how many times you got to say it. Criminals don't obey the law, so why would they turn their weapons in? They would also be putting themselves at a disadvantage relative to the government, which is retaining its own weapons despite distinct lack of competence. In April, a police station provided one-stop discount gun shopping for an enterprising burglar and intends to further squeeze the country's liberty. Even before the latest law has been fully implemented, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is planning more gun legislation. Of course she is. She's a twat. Including registration. Additionally, Security Intelligence Service stepped up domestic spying. Oh, God, see? After the mosque attacks, it saw a big boost in its funding courtesy of the latest budget. Now the government can spy on you because you might have a gun. That's banned by the government. See how this works? They make a law, and just by proxy, it includes more stuff they have to put on you. Spying, snitching, etc. Arguably, defiant gun owners are just being realistic and seeing little to gain by obeying restrictive laws that have the greatest impact on those who pose no threat to their neighbors. Fulfilling internal policing expectations, some Kiwis openly boast of defying the law. I wouldn't do that. Especially with the compensation rates set well below the value of the firearms that are supposed to be surrendered. Low turn-in numbers suggest they're matching words with action. And who can claim to be surprised? By refusing to comply with restrictions, New Zealand gun owners are just following in the footsteps of their counterparts in Australia, Europe, and the United States. In each of these places, and many more besides, gun owners ignored laws, kept their property out of sight, and frustrated efforts to disarm them. Yep. If New Zealand's political class had looked to the history of gun control efforts, what they're not stupid, they did. They just, once they implement these new laws of gun buybacks and gun control and gun legislations, they just say, well, we have to step up domestic spying on our citizens because we don't know who has guns, and we can't trust the evil plebes out there that voted us in, and therefore we make the laws to spy on them. Efforts they would have seen that they're walking a well-trodden path that leads to a dead end. But then again, if they had enough foresight to know that ill-considered restrictions on personal liberty are usually counterproductive and often breed rebellion, they probably wouldn't have gone into government. Exactly. So I guess that's my point, is that gun buybacks don't work. Because people sell, like, I got a crappy 22 that doesn't work anyways, I'll just hand it over. But then again, you got to understand, if you go to these gun buybacks by the government, it's pretty much, you're compelled to do it. There is no volunteer. You're not voluntary. It's not a voluntary process. You're being forced to by the government. And then once you go there, you have to sign documents or whatever. So your name's on a list. And so let's say something else happens and your name's on that list. Maybe they say, you know what? We'll pass this law saying if your name's on this list, we can go into your house without due process and search for illicit weapons that are illegal as per the government legislation. So why would you put your name on that list and turn in a gun? You wouldn't. I don't want to be on a list, especially in New Zealand. So when people say, there's no slippery slope, we just want a sensible gun control. This is sensible gun control, domestic spying on its citizens to make sure you don't have illicit weapons. Don't turn your weapons in, New Zealanders. Just don't. Peacefully protest.